So I guess welcome to the 2022 RT-130 hosted by the Nebraska Forest Service. Looking at the agenda for this year's refresher, we're going to talk about the 2021 year in review. We'll do some 120-day outlook forecast things, and then Seth will take over for a case study, and then finish up with Eric on the main topic of the year of mental health and well-being. So to start out with some of the year in review stuff for the single engine air tanker, what you see on this screen is all of the fires that the Nebraska SEEP was ordered for and supported throughout the season. We had an early onset this year, late June was the earliest we brought the seat on, and finished up in October. This is all the fires, some out of state, some in state, but these were the fires that we had multiple aircraft on. Most of those were out in the western part of the state. We had a grand total for the year of 138 loads, 96,000 gallons of retardant was delivered, and we had just shy of 116 flight hours total. So for the year, and these numbers kind of fluctuate as reporting gets done later, but a total of 937 fires were reported for the state, and 400,000 acres burned. So then, like I said, there's some fluctuation in these reports.
That's 40,000.
Or 40,000, excuse me. Thanks, Eric. Some of the highlights of the fires for the year. Like I said, we had an early onset fire season at the end of June with the dry lightning front that came through, and we had multiple fire starts all along the northern north central edge from western Cherry County all the way through Holt County north of Atkinson, where the Brush Creek fire was ignited on the 23rd of June. Consumed 6,640 acres just immediately south of the Niobrara River. It burned up the Brush Creek and the Spring Creek drainages. And the big notable, I guess, takeaway from that one was the amount of cattle lost in that fire. And that area of the state isn't, they don't typically see larger events like this, specifically in the wildland. So as conditions have worsened over the last couple of years, and we were, coming out of a dry winter, conditions are conducive for large fires like this. And we expect to see more of these in areas of the state where we don't typically see those. This was prompted a request for the state YRAT team. For those of you that took the refresher last year, remember we talked about state resources. This was one of the first deployments of the YRAT team for 2021. And then it also prompted a move of the mobile seat base from Ogallala over to the O'Neill Airport, just so that we had a little better coverage along that northern tier. The next one was the Hackberry fire on August 5th. And this was sort of the inaugural deployment of the Nebraska Type 3 incident management team. This fire burned around 6,000 acres. And we had heavy air tankers out of Colorado, multiple seats out of South Dakota, Nebraska, and Wyoming, and activated the National Guard helicopters. Air attack is always something that you're going to see on incidents that have multiple aircraft, especially when you have mixed aircraft like this or multiple seats. And what that does is bring sort of that aerial supervision to keep things in order when you get that much aircraft in one given area. The Colorado multi-mission aircraft is not a suppression aircraft, but a more of an intel gathering aircraft. They have all kinds of high-tech systems on board of that airplane, and they can fly over and map fire areas, help find priority hot spots, and get accurate acres and those sorts of things. So really useful tool to have so close when we have fires like this burning. The next one was the Crossfire, not too many days after, on August 11th. This one again was down in that Banner County area, around 2,500 acres. We brought heavy air tankers back again, along with multiple seats, National Guard helicopters, and air attack again. So the Crossfire out of all of them was actually one of the smaller ones of the year, but burnt very actively in some rough terrain in the Wildcat Hills. And then on September 13th, we had the post fire in Dawes County, just south of Crawford. This was the second order of the Type 3 team, 5,400 acres, heavy air tankers and seats again, along with air attack and the National Guard. This fire actually had started on the Monday previous, where we flew multiple loads with multiple seats and thought that everything was, for the most part, buttoned up. It was in a mop up and monitor phase. And then with some wind events that came in later in the week, it kind of helped rekindle and kick that fire outside the containment, and it took off again. So just kind of a sign of the times and the field conditions. Things were extremely susceptible last summer, and it's not looking much better for this year. The Vista Trend fire in Scottsbluff County was right over the same time as the post fire, and so we actually had multiple large fires burning at the same time. Resources from the Scottsbluff area were actually en route or on the post fire and had to be demobbed so that they could return back to manage their own fire down there. 2,600 acres. We did take one seat off of the post fire and moved it down to Scottsbluff. So we had multiple seat bases open and operating at the same time. We brought National Guard helicopters out again to help support the Vista Trend fire. And then we had to find national resource helicopters to help support the post fire. So lots of moving parts and a lot of things going on when we have multiple events happening at the same time. And then as we moved out of our typical fire season and got things winterized and put away for the year, and got kind of back into some more training events for the fall, we had the Buffalo Creek fire in Banner County kick off again. This fire went for around 2,600 acres. We had no seats on our own contract. This time of year, typically a lot of those seats have gone off contract. So we had to scramble a little bit. They were able to get some single engine air tankers out of the Front Range of Colorado. And we had to bring one of the seat bases there at Scottsbluff out of winterization in order to support those aircraft, and then National Guard helicopters. So, as we say, as long as we're not getting moisture and we don't have snow cover in Nebraska, we can be in fire season. And this is a pretty good example of that. I don't think any of us want to have to de-winterize a seat base in a short order again. That was not a fun undertaking for sure. Uh-oh, did I jump?
Yeah.
I did. Okay, so that was kind of the highlights of the big events that happened in 2021, and we'll get into some of the 120-day outlook. So typically around the 1st of January or the 1st of the year, the Region 2 or Rocky Mountain areas will release their predictive services outlook for late winter and spring. And then this gets updated typically, I think, weekly as we move through the spring and into the summer months. So from when this was released to now, it has changed in some areas significantly and in some areas not so much. But just taking a look at the 120-day general outlook, which we'll see again sort of at the end of this, but the significant wildland fire potential across most of the Rocky Mountain area is expected to be normal from January through April 2022. The exception will be for portions of southeast Colorado and western Kansas, where above normal significant wildland fire potential is expected due to persistence of above normal temperatures and below normal precipitation during the outlook period. That will keep fuels receptive and promote rapid spread during wind events. So the big story of the winter and the spring has been in the La Nina phase, which typically means below average precip and above average temps, which we've clearly seen. So looking at the large picture for the Great Plains or the High Plains area, the drought map. This was released on the 28th of December, and since then, as you can see, it has greatly increased. So where we did have some very small isolated areas in the state of Nebraska specifically that we're not in any drought conditions, we now have no areas of the state that are not in drought. So we're completely encompassed by some drought conditions all the way across the state. So kind of talking about that El Nino and La Nina patterns, this is slightly changed a little bit since the initial release of it, where we still see a very strong La Nina pattern. So warmer temps and lower chances of precip. As we move into March, April, and May, we start to trend more to that neutral forecast, which isn't all that surprising. For us in the Great Plains, we tend to spend a lot of time in that equal chances of either or. So, but we'll see. So your temperatures and precipitation anomalies. So kind of what they're forecasting, obviously, to go along with the La Nina pattern is above normal temps and below normal precip. And this kind of hangs on all the way through the spring months. Not until we start looking into April and May, where our best chances of spring moisture typically come into play. This is going to be kind of the story moving forward. Seasonal temperature and precip outlook, just another explanation. Probability of percentages as far as where we sit in that above normal temps and below normal precip. So a lighter signal for the central area, a little bit stronger as you move west. And then the significant fire potential, January through April of 2022. This was the initial release. We were, as long as it's not shaded, whereas you see down in Kansas, they have that above normal significant fire potential. We're sort of, as long as it's not shaded, they consider us in what they call normal potential, or sort of where they would expect to see us for the year at that given time. Since then, and we don't have that map, I guess, but that outlook has increased exponentially. So they have a majority of all of Nebraska in the above normal for significant fire potential through March April, and as we get into May, we slide back, or they're predicting that we slide back more into normal potential range. And then you'll start to see the above normal stuff start to slide down into the southwest, which is not uncommon. That's typically the region in the southwest where we see the kind of the beginning of the large fire season, and they prior to the monsoon seasons that typically show up there in June and July. So we'll see how it plays out. So over the kind of going back to the recap, I guess, on the 120-day significant outlook, you guys anybody can access this on the Rocky Mountain Dispatch website under predictive services. And I encourage you, everyone, to go out and kind of do their own research on what the forecasts are for your given areas of the state. And, the more you know, the better off we're going to be. But long term, it's just not looking all that great. What we've seen for snow in the last few days is probably the biggest moisture makers that we've had statewide for the whole winter. And some areas have received some beneficial moisture from those and some have not. So, but it's still expected. Some of the driest and the warmer above normal temps and drier areas are expected are still a majority in Nebraska, western Kansas, eastern Colorado. So we're still within the boundaries of more of what we've seen through the course of the winter. And if you guys have any other questions or need some guidance on as to where to find some of this, you can always reach out to one of us at the Forest Service here, and we'd be more than happy to get you to where you need to be to look at some of this stuff on your own. And with that, I think I'm handing it over to Seth for the next section here.
Yes, sir. Let me get the control here. How are you advancing the slide?
I think he's just hitting the forward or up or down key.
Well, I'm doing that too.
There you go. Now you got control of it.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, hello, everybody. This is Seth Peterson up in Chadron. I'm just going to start this by looking back on some of the stuff that was getting firefighters injured or fatality incidents in the last year. It only says 23 fatalities were reported, but not every state or agency reports all their injuries. So this is just of the agencies that do report. These were the findings that they had in the last year, but in total, 23 fatalities were reported. So let's look at how some of those occurred and what injuries also occurred during this time. 6 injuries from chainsaw cuts were reported, 1 to the hand, 2 to the arm, and 3 to leg or foot. Note that the most common one there is the leg and foot, so make sure that we're wearing our proper PPE of chaps, hard hat, making sure that we have our long sleeves down is going to protect us as good as possible. But chainsaw cuts were apparent this year. Then we all know that vehicles are one of the more dangerous elements of wildland firefighting or any EMS response. So we had some rollovers, 1 ATV, 1 water tender, 2 engines, 3 heavy equipment, and 3 trucks. Not sure if those were actually on the incident or if they were in response, but we need to remember that traveling in vehicles is dangerous and does create injuries for wildland firefighters. And then this always surprises me, maybe because we're in Nebraska, we grew up on flatter terrain that doesn't have as many big hazard trees. But consistently, trees are also a very big incident for wildland firefighters. And this year we had 12 non-chainsaw operations and then 5 chainsaw operations that led to somebody getting hit by a tree. And this can range from anything from just not paying attention to where you're taking lunch and you're underneath a tree that could come down at any time and people get struck while just eating their lunch. But it's important, always keep your head on a swivel, look around you, look to see if you're surrounded by any weakened trees. And if you are, either get rid of the tree, cutting it down, or flag it off and just make sure that nobody's working in that area because we don't want them to get hit. We also had 18 entrapments, 9 during initial attack and 9 during an extended attack. And in an activity we're going to be doing here in just a little bit, we will be reading about some people that got entrapped this last year. But in total, 18. And then 26 burn injuries were reported, 10 during the entrapment, 5 during mop-up, 5 during firing operations, 2 during chainsaw, and then evidently 4 people reported burns but didn't say how it happened. So just some of the incidents that occurred in the last year. Going forward, some of the lessons we learned from some of these injuries. On the left side, we got 2 examples of helmets that help somebody. One being the wildland fire helmet that we're accustomed to. A log fell on this individual's head, and if we could zoom in on that helmet, we can see that it actually cracked, but it fully protected the individual. And then on the bottom there, I'm sure most departments don't do this, but on the federal side, they actually require when you're in an ATV, you have to wear a full DOT helmet. And this individual got flipped out of their ATV and actually struck a rock, and you can see the damage that was done to that helmet there. Then on the right side, just general, we got to wear our yellows and greens out there, showing that when impacted by heat, that PPE actually does protect us, and in these cases helped minimize the burns that these individuals received. Another one to be aware of is our soft shoulders. There's reports of people just pulling off on the side of the road and then thinking they're going to be able to pull right out of it, but with a soft shoulder, this case, individual rolled into the ditch. And how many times do we pull off on the side of the road to look at maps or handle the radio and then think we're going to pull right out? But we got big, top-heavy pieces of equipment, and if we get to the soft shoulder of the road, obviously that can result in a rollover accident. Then the aviation world, we had some incidents throughout the year. Interesting one on the left side here. Co-Fire, they're out of Colorado, obviously. They're in our backyard, and we know many of their pilots, and they've flown on a few of our fires for us. But on November 16th, Co-Fire had been for years upgrading equipment and getting pilots that were trained for night vision goggles as they fly, so they can do some night missions. And Co-Fire in the state of Colorado agreed that on this fire, they were going to do the first ever night flight on a fire, which you can tell in the wildland world that could be potentially dangerous, flying at night. Obviously, these seaplanes, they fly very low to the ground. And the first time they ever got the approval to do it, unfortunately, the seat crashed into the side of a mountain. Was it completely 100% related just to the night vision goggles and flying at night? We don't 100% know, If we talk to the local people that were there, they did say there was some kind of wind event that happened at the exact same time. So that could be a factor of what led to it. But in my opinion, if that happened on the very first flight, that program's probably going to be tough to continue. And Justin, he has a story of, it was either the day before or just days before, the fire that happened in November in Scotts Bluff, Colorado, or Co-Fire Colorado actually reached out to Justin and asked if we could do the night mission on our fire, and we turned down that request. But it's just interesting that Nebraska almost got wrapped up into the first night vision goggles. But thankfully, we turned it down, and this didn't occur on one of our fires. And then interesting one, air attack platform actually in Arizona went down. I would usually say that is the safest of all the aviation that flies in our fires, because they fly so much higher in the air and kind of not even close to the ground. But local reports of people that saw it happen actually say that the wing detached from the aircraft and led to the accident. And that's a King Air right there. And it's important to note that King Airs are meant for transportation, maybe not they may not be as robust as they should be to be flying in a wildfire environment. So possibly pushing that piece of equipment in a way that it wasn't really meant for. And some other aviation fatalities out there. Interesting to know, like one of these was on a prescribed fire. So even in a prescribed fire environment, it's not a safe working environment for everybody. And then one that I wish, or I need to read up more on, that I think it would be interesting, is third one down there. A helicopter actually crashed. Or which one was it? Oh, it'd be the top one. Helicopter crashed in some water, and the pilot was actually able to swim away. So that'd be an interesting one to look into. All right, so I guess recapping, first we talked about the fires from last year in Nebraska. Then we kind of did a look forward into what the conditions are showing for the 2020 season, which sound interesting. And then we looked at some of the cases that happened in the last year that led to injury or burns. And now we are going to ask you, right here we have a link on the screen, and when we produce this video, hopefully we are going to get this link somewhere where you can just click on it, and it'll bring you to a case study on the lessons learned site. If you don't know what the lessons learned site is, any injuries or near misses, a lot of agencies actually produce a paper on the accident. And this paper we're going to request that you guys read is on the Harris Fire burnover. And so what we're going to ask you to do is you're going to pause the video, follow that link, go ahead and read the Harris Fire burnover. And once you've got that done, you can come back to this video and start it again, and we will discuss it. So follow the link. Also, if you can't find it, maybe just Google Harris Fire burnover, or go to the Lessons Learned website and type in the Harris Fire burnover, and hopefully you're able to find the accident report that we'll be going over. So we'll see you in a little bit. All right, now we just go into discussing it. And you two pipe in if you got any additional. This fire is really interesting to me because this happened like mid-July or so. And on August 2nd or 3rd, Eric and I actually got dispatched to Montana, to an area very close to where this fire actually occurred, near Miles City, Montana. And we actually were thrown into a scenario that kind of is similar to it. Essentially, we had to decide, we had a little active flame build up on the fire we were on that we needed to address. And we could have done it in one of two ways. We could have drove pretty well straight to it and been within 50 yards of it. But we would have parked the engine in the green. And if that fire decided to pick up, we could have been very well in a similar situation as this Harris fire. But we kind of knew a little bit about this accident. We were in a similar fuel type, similar areas where this happened. And we actually decided that, well, this just happened a week or two ago. Let's not also become a statistic. Let's go park the truck in a black where it was safe. But that made it so we had to do about a half-mile hike into that location. So it just proves that we are true students of fire. We took the knowledge that we knew of at the time and applied it to the current situation, and we were successful. So that's one reason this report is important to me. I used it in real life to make an educated decision. So as we walk through the incident, looking at it in front of me, the takeaways I got from this is, first of all, it was a rekindle from lightning the day before. Rekindles, it's amazing how many of them occur, and we need to be mopping up as good as possible, and taking mop up seriously when we get to that stage. So we don't have a rekindle, so we don't have a post fire pop back up, or this fire. When they arrived on scene, they tied in with the incident commander, which is all good. Incident commander told them that they needed to attack a certain flank. And when they attacked that flank, they were only dealing with 3 to 4 foot flames, and potentially, or supposedly, it was a pretty easy knockdown, which I think that gave them some confidence to move on to another part of or a different flank. And the key that happened was that they drove through a barbed wire fence that had already been cut, and they chose to go into the green, the unburned fuel. So they're doing their direct attack from the green, or in the fuel, which, if the wind and everything would have held how it had been, they probably would have been successful. But what they weren't aware of or weren't prepared for was the 180-degree switch in the wind. And those 3-foot flames suddenly became 20-foot flames, and that caught them. And now they have a barbed wire fence in the way. And as you read, the young rookie decided he was already in the cab of the truck and just stayed in the cab of the truck. He chose not to try to drive away because he knew there was a cliff somewhere, but he didn't quite know where it was. So he just rode it out and came away with no injuries, but stated that for 20-30 seconds, it got really, really hot in there. But fortunately, he wasn't injured. The engine boss, thankfully, survived, basically running into a 20-foot tall front when that wind switched. I think he ended up with 45% of his body covered in 2nd and 3rd degree burns. But as he tried to just run through the flames, he encountered that barbed wire fence and was stuck there for a bit longer. You guys got any more input on what happened there?
Yeah, Seth, I'd chime in. I guess the one of the things that always reminds me when I read these deals is just the importance of, you know, keeping informed on the weather and those elements. 10 to 20 mile an hour wind with an increase to 55 is extremely significant, especially in that fuel type. So I don't know, when I read this, that was one thing that stood out to me. It just reminds me of how important it is to really make sure we're getting up to date and timely weather briefs and kind of keeping on top of that throughout the operational period. I think even a helicopter, there was a helicopter doing bucket work in that vicinity on the fire around the same time, and he had reported having to, you know, jettison his water just to, you know, remain in control of the helicopter. So yeah, that's significant wind.
And we talk about it all the time. There's no real excuse in the 21st century that this stuff should really catch us too much off guard. We have our cell phone right in our pocket that we can be looking at the weather, proposed changes in the weather, and even a Kestrel nowadays for $120, we can get that local, what is actually happening on the fire as far as wind, temperature, RH. We can do that, and reporting that up to maybe the weather service to get a spot weather forecast for the exact area that you're going to be in. It's going to help clue us into any of the possible weather changes that could be occurring that day. Eric, you got any reaction?
Oh, I think you guys pretty much hit everything there that I was going to talk about. So.
And it's important to note too, this isn't a big federal agency that got caught here. This is a volunteer fire department from Montana. So I think it closely relates to, and now fighting fire in eastern Montana. It's really similar to a lot of the places that we have in Nebraska. So certainly could happen anywhere, but should hit home to any of the Nebraska VFDs that are responding. All right. Well, thank you very much for taking the time and reading through that. During the summer, I'll hop on lessons learned throughout the summer and just see what accidents have been reported. And sometimes you hear that something happened and you don't really know what went down. So those reports are really nice to just know exactly what happened. So if you're on the lessons learned site, feel free. You can search and be very specific in what you want to read about. If you just are concerned about engines, you can search engines. You can search crews, entrapments, burns. You can get pretty specific on what you want to read about. So just encourage you to use that website. And with that, I'll pass it over to Eric on the special topic.
Okay, so we have all of the deals with all of our refreshers that we have certain objectives that we have to meet. And, you know, the case studies, the reason that we use those a lot is to go back and refresh ourselves with the 10 and 18. Like we do every year. We talk about, you know, everything that happened the year prior. We talk about all the statistics, what the projected forecast is going to be. But this year, we all kind of sat together and were discussing when we were building this about what is one thing that is not really talked about and needs to be talked about. And one of the things that we found was that mental health is a really big one that we don't really talk about anymore. Or even talk about it all. I mean, it seems to be kind of like a taboo topic to talk about. And it's like, you know, we've seen and some of us have experienced it where, you know, someone's mental health, whether our own or somebody that we know, has directly affected us in some way or another. And so this is the year that we decided to implement this into the refresher. And we've done this quite a few times since the beginning of the year. And this has been a very well received topic to talk about. It gets people that don't normally talk about it to talk about it. So yeah, and we're going to be kind of tag teaming this one all together, myself and Justin and Seth. And so we'll start out right now with some background and some statistics. So this comes from the National Volunteer Fire Council, and they did a study from 1983 to 2017 about the number of volunteer firefighters in the United States. 1983 was a record-setting year for volunteer firefighters across the United States, and 2017 was a record year for the least amount of firefighters volunteer firefighters across the United States. And in 1983, you had almost 885,000 volunteers that were reported in the United States. In 2017, you had just almost 683,000 volunteers. So that is a deficit of over 200,000 members that have gone or that are no longer there. And one of the big questions that we ask is why? And these are just some of the reasons that nationally they're starting to see, they're doing studies on it to see why exactly the nation is losing so many volunteer firefighters. And so a lot of it happens to do with time demands. You know, it's time away from your job, it's time away from your family, it's time away from everything else. Other thing is training requirements. Everything's always changing. There's new ways to do things. So, you know, change the requirements for training changes. You know, they update the curriculum every few years. And so it's always ever changing. So people unfortunately don't have that kind of time to continue on with the training requirements. We have increased call volumes for those of you and those of us that have been in as volunteer firefighters. We've noticed in our areas that we have an increase of call volumes. And a lot of that happens to be because of the change in the nature of the business. And we have people that are calling 911 that should probably not be calling 911. They're calling 911 as a taxi service, or they're calling 911 because they're just lonely and want somebody to come to their house and talk to them. You know, so there's that. You have changes in sociological conditions, like in the urban areas. People used to be invested in their communities and used to take pride in their communities. So to be invested and take pride in your community, you would do stuff such as volunteer, you know, or join, you know, certain clubs like the Elks Club or Eagles. And I mean, it's not just the fire side that's seeing this change of this deficit in membership. It's all the way across because of this. Sociological changes in rural areas. You know, a lot of employers don't really want to let the volunteer firefighters unless the employers are on the department themselves. A lot of these employers don't want to let their employees go on these calls. Nebraska has that act that as long as you are in your off time and as long as you make every available, give your employer ample notice that you're going to be late or you're not going to be in because you are on a fire or on an incident on your off time, that the employer cannot fire you for that. But with Nebraska being a right to work state, there's also, you know, they can let their employees go for that also. So, and then we also have, like everything, you have leadership problems. You might have problems within the leadership itself where they're having issues, or you might just have firefighters that have an issue with the leadership. So some departmental challenges that all departments are facing are, low membership numbers. I was out with Seth teaching a red card class in a department that I actually used to be a member of. And, 15 years ago, there were probably 30 active members on that department. And when we were there teaching that class here a couple weeks ago, I noticed that their roster board that used to be overflowing now only has 15 total members on it, and half of them are active members. So everybody's hurting for volunteers. With that, you'll have poor trainings and poor incident responses. You'll have those that want to show up when it's important, want to show up when there's a lot of action to go around, but they don't want to show up for trainings, or they only want to show up for trainings that they want to show up for, or nobody wants to get out of bed at 2 o'clock in the morning when it's snowing to go do a lift assist. We also have the inability to recruit and retain members. People are not beating down your doors anymore for them to join your departments. And sometimes we have to ask ourselves, why are we not getting individuals coming to our department wanting to join our ranks? We all have disappearing budgets and funding opportunities. The days of the pancake feeds and spaghetti dinners are dying out. Those members in your community that used to be such a supportive role have either moved away or passed on. So we don't have that quite so often. So I guess when we do have attendance engagement, we got to ask ourselves, why do we join volunteer departments? So you may have always wanted to work or be part of the volunteer fire department. Probably a family tradition. My dad was a firefighter. I'm a firefighter. My brother's a firefighter. My son is going into firefighting when he graduates high school next year. So, it's a family tradition. You want to help your community. You're probably just bored, maybe looking for something to do. A lot of times what we have is in certain departments, you'll see that they treat it as a social club. And the way that I try to, if you want to look to see if everybody's using that as a social club, look to see if there's still liquor in the fire station. If there's still liquor and alcohol in the fire station, chances are there's a lot of people there that are treating it as a social club. So now this is the part where you all get to discuss, how do you recruit new members? How do you keep those new members, and how do you keep them engaged? So I guess I'll ask Justin and Seth to come in on this and ask them, how do your departments recruit new members? How do you retain them, and how do you keep them engaged?
I think Shadron's a unique department just because we got we're about 6,000 people and have a college in town. So recruitment really hasn't been terrible for us, but we get a lot of college membership. And we only have them for 4 years and then they're gone. So we put a lot of money and time into training them for 4 years and then they're gone, which means we have to start all over. But I think through the training we provide on a monthly basis and the rotation of topics we have really help for the older guys, refreshing. And then for the new people, it's constant exposure to different topics of training, different wildland to structure to EMS. But we do, you mentioned the spaghetti feeds and all that. We do prevention week stuff. We do some other feeds throughout the year. And I think just getting people inside the department, talking to us as members, gives us just enough exposure that we haven't struggled too far on the recruiting side. And this topic's going to go there, but for you departments that put a lot of time and effort into recruiting, it's a big deal when somebody brand new walks in the door and wants to be a member. And it's not just a big deal the day that they walk in, but what do you do once they're in the department to retain them? Whether it's providing the training they need, whether it's giving them the proper gear to be successful, or where this topic is going to go, making sure that we don't expose them to too much right off the bat that may be overwhelming, that may put them in a bad place. And if they do get exposed to it, what are our departments doing to help mitigate the mental struggles that they may have? But I guess I'll pass it off to Justin, that probably has a little different department and setup for that recruitment.
Yeah, I think, we've put a lot of time here in Ainsworth. We've put on a lot of time into trying to retain our good members. Our recruiting pool is seemingly very small, and we don't have, over time, we haven't had as many new folks come into town, and the ones that do typically don't have the time to give, seemingly. I don't really know what the answer is as to why we're not getting more, but we've put a lot into trying to retain the members that we do have. We've changed our process on how we put people on. We used to just had a very simple application, and you would come in and attend a meeting, and the department would vote to put you on or not. And then sometimes shortly after that, we would see new members show up a lot, and sometimes not at all. And so then we had to go through the process of removing those folks. And it's tough, because you don't want to have to do that. But if they're not showing up and they're not participating, then they're not really helping out. And so we revamped the way we do that, and we changed the application process. And now we have put more emphasis on a probationary period of 1 year, where we set some expectations for those new members to meet those. And then after that probationary year, then they can be voted on to become a full member. And so we try to set up some benchmarks and some things like that for them to hit throughout the course of the year. They're not out anything if it turns out that it's not something they can do, or they choose not to do anymore. And same with the department. We haven't invested a lot of time and money and all that stuff into an individual that doesn't end up sticking around. And I think that's helped. We have a nice fire station, and we have a lot of amenities here. We put in a very nice exercise and gym area that members and their families have access to. But I think that the difference between, like what Seth was saying, and our situation is we don't seem to get the new people in town to get them to join. So we don't have that refreshing pool every so many years that we can pull from. We're doing pretty well now. We haven't had a lot of turnover, and we have had a few younger folks join. But I think, just as Eric was talking about earlier, there's a lot of people that seem to be leaving the rural areas, moving into larger towns and stuff for better jobs, conveniences, things of that nature. And so that puts some of us at a little bit of a deficit because we just don't have those people to pull from, which is unfortunate. And the rural areas have a lot to offer, but you have to sort of want what those areas have. And you have to be okay with not being close to the larger cities and having some of those conveniences, I think. But so, yeah, it's a work in progress. And I think it's one of those things that we have to be able to talk about more openly. And, like I encourage people to brainstorm. I don't like the idea of bartering with people to try to do it. I think they kind of want to have to do it on their own. But yeah, I think if you have the silver bullet to solve that problem, you're ahead of the curve a long ways.
Yeah, and when we did this last week, actually, when we taught this, found out from the department that they, the US government decided to start incentivizing volunteer firefighters by after 2 years of service, then they start paying you $250 a year as long as you make, is it 10%, 10 to 15% of your calls, training, and meetings?
Yeah, it's a percentage that for most everybody it's achievable. I know I know our department, we do that. It's the tax break. So every year at tax season, you get $250 when you turn your taxes in. It's, it's not a lot, but it's something. And I think I've talked to some of the folks that were involved in trying to get that put in place in Nebraska. And they said, it wasn't exactly what we were shooting for, but it's something. And I've heard other things too. I actually was at an individual was telling me that their department puts so many dollars a year into a retirement fund for each member after so many years, and they pay them, a few dollars a call. So, so there's I've heard of all kinds of things all over the board is on how to try to keep people engaged and stuff. But
Yeah.
I think it's a real fear of burnout as much as it is a real fear of not people just participating,
Yeah, and that's something we'll get into here shortly too. But I mean, even that department that I'm talking about, not only do they get that $250 tax break, but they also told them that their members, that they'll actually give them at the end of the year $2,000 on top of that, as long as they make their calls, their meetings, and their trainings. And I guess it's a generational gap there, because they did say that a lot of the older folks that are on the departments are like, yeah, that's great, and they stayed there doing that. But they also said that the younger generation was like, well, $2,000, that's not a lot, and so they didn't want anything to do with it. So it's like you said, it's hard to find that magic bullet to keep everybody engaged, and some of the things that we're talking about now is why departmental members become disengaged. And like Justin was talking about, you got to try to find that happy medium so that you're not finding that there's stagnancy in, all right, we don't have the calls for the month, or say we don't get a call for 6 months, and you start seeing that well, when I joined, we were getting calls all the time, and here we are 6 months later and we haven't had anything. Or you don't want to burn them out, because it's like, okay, we're constantly going. And it's like, you have to find that happy medium to keep them engaged so that they're not suffering from the stagnancy and they're not suffering from the burnout. You've got the leadership conflicts, with the subordinates, with the leadership, or within the leadership itself. So those individuals that are in those lower leadership levels, such as the lieutenants and the captains, those are the ones that are they're in all intents and purposes, those are the ones that are or should be acting as mentors towards the newer firefighters, so that they have the opportunity to train or to keep them engaged and keep them wanting to keep coming back. So like Justin said, you got people that are relocating, they're leaving, and even Seth said that, they have memberships that are members that join while they're in college, and you have them for 4 years, and then they get their degree and they're gone. Not very many of them decide to stick around in that smaller town, especially like Justin said. People leave because they want those amenities in a bigger town. They want to be connected to better stuff and better things. Also have family conflicts. Not everybody is as lucky that have understanding children or spouses or significant others or anything. You have those family conflicts. The demand of the job, you're constantly, you're gonna miss birthdays, you're gonna miss anniversaries, you're gonna miss dinners. So you have those family conflicts. And then what we're going to be getting into is what Seth kind of led up to, of, exposing people to too much too fast. So this kind of is where the personal conflict comes into, where, they may have seen something or experienced something that may have caused them to not want to be exposed to that again. And this leads into the next thing that we're going to do as far as the video of the of mental health. So it's about a 15-minute video, and it'll talk about everything for the mental health. Let me know if you guys, give me a thumbs up if you guys can hear this on your end.
A long time ago, early in my career in 1979, when I was a hotshot, we went through a shelter deployment up along the Salmon River up in Idaho. While we were all pretty fine, it still was traumatic for us. And I remember specifically that no one talked about it. Not from the organization, not from our crew leader, not even between ourselves. And years later, that stuck with me. And when I went back to talk with some of my former hotshot members, that they had mentioned that, yeah, they were too bothered by it. They were wondering, how come we're not talking about this? I don't feel right for this. It still sticks in my memory as a bad experience.
Lost a young man at 1805, leaving his station. A car pulled out in front of him, and he was seriously injured and later died from his injuries. But everybody first on scene were all his crew members. From that moment on, just seeing how things were executed, not because of ill intent, but just because of not knowing what to do. I first was extremely angry and upset. I wanted better care for these people, and that turned into, hey, how about you take a class to help us help others?
We put so much emphasis on physical fitness in Wildland Fire. Our goal is to have firefighters and fire personnel mentally equally as fit as they are physically fit. And that's where we forged the term comprehensive fitness, where mind and body are equally as strong.
When we think of traumatic stress, we typically think of a singular event. So in the mind's viewpoint, chronic stress can be every bit as debilitating as that singular acute stress incident. It's like death by 1,000 cuts, and it affects the way the mind processes that stress and how it reacts to future stress, whether it's ongoing anxiety, depression, illnesses. It changes the way you process it, not only now, but also in the future. I think also too that the complexities of fire nowadays, and also being more in that wildland urban interface where you're seeing a lot more traumatic events, can be a lot more debilitating than it was years ago than when I was fighting fire. And if you lost 1,000 acres, it wasn't that big of a deal. But 1 acre today might mean 4 people's homes lost, or maybe a life. Stress from a biological point of view to the body doesn't have to be physical. It could be mental stress just as well. And in the firefighting world, we're all making critical decisions that can affect lives and property. So it's not only just the boots on the ground firefighter, but it's dispatchers, mid-level managers, planners, logistics people. We all have some skin in the game on this, and we're under a lot of pressure to come through during a busy fire season. So it affects all of us, from the bottom to the very top. Yeah, there's been a definite increase in the number of wildland firefighters who have taken their lives in the last 4, 5, 6 years or so. Now, why that's happening, we're not exactly sure. Again, maybe because of these prolonged fire seasons, more time away from their loved ones and their family lives, which creates a lack of support systems. There's more awareness about suicide and the issue in the firefighting world now, but we also have to look back to a personal level. What are your own personal views about it? On an immediate level, what do you do, or what does one do when you think a friend or a coworker is suicidal? You got to look at 2 things. You have to look at the risk factors and the warning signs. So the risk factors are things that make somebody more vulnerable statistically to take their own lives. Previous involvement with a suicide, maybe a family member or a loved one. Sudden changes in their coping skills or in their life experiences, a recent divorce, financial troubles, substance abuse, big one, a history of mental health issues, depression especially. So all those things start adding up as risk factors. And then you start looking for the warning signs. Casual remarks. My life isn't worth living anymore. Nobody would miss me. What does it all mean about life? Things like that. Sudden changes in personality. Your normal gregarious person that shows up to work on time, is a good contributor, all of a sudden starts missing assignments, showing up late, becoming more withdrawn, losing their sense of humor, changes in their spending habits, start giving everything away that they need. I don't need this, I don't need this. Buying new things, buying firearms, drinking more heavily. So all those things are the warning signs, somebody may be considering taking their life.
I grew up in upstate New York, a little town called Greene. Joined the Marine Corps after that. I was 24 years old, January 2004. Yeah, I did 10 years in the Marine Corps, medically retired in 2013. I was involved in a roadside explosion, IED, and there was 4 people in the Humvee, 2 didn't make it, myself and another guy did. I wanted to be a Marine since I was really young, I wanted to retire, and it's the only thing I knew. And then, getting forced to retire was kind of ripped out from me, I felt like, and it just fell into depression, and I got real bad, real dark times. Suicide popped in. I actually tried to do it twice. Thank God it didn't work out, but yeah, it's just real bad time. But being on a crew, getting on this veterans hand crew, it really saved my life. I mean, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me.
Number one thing, being able to ask that person, are you thinking about taking your life? That's the most direct thing that you can do. People will say, well, are you thinking of hurting yourself? No, I never want to hurt myself. I would just take a bunch of pills so I wouldn't feel any pain. See, you have to ask directly, are you thinking of taking your life? One of the big stigmas You know, the big factor that everybody shies away from is thinking that if you ask somebody if they're going to take their life, is that going to trigger thoughts of suicide? Definitely not. Most likely, when people hear that, it's almost like a relief. They want to talk about it. Most people don't want to take their life. You know, they're at that point in their life where everything seems hopeless, where they can't escape their problems, whatever it may be, and they see no way out, but they want help most of the time. And if you allow them to say, yes, I need help, I'm thinking of taking my life, that's the first big step. Right after that, you want to listen, non-judgmentally. Regardless of what you think about their problems are their own. And to listen allows them to express themselves, and that leads to maybe I'm open to getting more professional help. And then you can assess the situation even further. If they're thinking, yes, I'm thinking about taking my life, it's crossing my mind a lot, you have a little bit more time to help them. Well, let's see if we can get some help. Let's call the suicide counseling line, or let's go talk to your doctor or so. Or if you assess that the situation is immediate, they want to take their lives, after making sure that you're safe, get help immediately. Stay with that person. Do not leave that person. Remove their access to firearms. Take away the keys to their car. Get help. Get friends to stay with them. Intervene right away. And then lend support in the ongoing process. You know, you intervene, but stay with that person, you know, check in with that person. Now again, encourage them to develop good support habits for themselves and professional ongoing help. Again, it's difficult if you're a manager talking to somebody that works in your crew, let's say, but again, approaching that is much more valuable than the after effects.
Communication is huge. We talk about communication in LCES, talk on the radio, but how do you communicate with your spouse? A lot of times we assume that they won't understand, and so we only communicate with our crew or our comrades, and that tends to alienate the significant other. Communication is huge.
If they express their fears, if they talk about things that bother them inside, they're immediately labeled. And that's ingrained in us. And that starts when you're a little kid, and it goes through the rest of your life. So we can talk all you want about just communicate with your loved ones or your family, but overcoming that and breaking down that barrier is really, really tough. Yeah. But it needs to be done, because all you do is create this cycle of miscommunication. If you're not communicating, you know that your loved ones, your family that cares about you, they're not going to come back and talk to you. It becomes cyclical. So somehow we have to start breaking down those barriers, especially among first responders, the male personality, that it's okay to talk.
I was married my last 4 years, divorced now, but getting remarried again, so it's good. But with my first wife, she had no idea that I got injured or anything. That never talked about it. She had no idea. But now with my current wife, she knows everything. I open up to her about it. So it's nice to have that communication line where we just talk about anything under the sun. So it's good. It's good to get it out there.
One of the most important techniques you can use to help manage your stress, not only in an immediate sense, but also on a day-to-day aspect, is just through the practice of mindfulness. I know that sounds very cliche-ish nowadays, but all that really is just the art of focusing on deep breathing in order to center your awareness in the present right now and push away the day-to-day anxiety and stressors that constantly barrage you and hit you all the time. And basically what it is just spending some time each day to quiet the mind. And the best way to do that is focusing through deep rhythmic breathing. And the reason why that works biologically is twofold. One is that as you deep breathe, it's been shown through functional MRIs that within the brain it releases certain chemicals like serotonin. Serotonin is the feel-good chemical, the one that helps lift your moods. And they've seen that through deep breathing that helps promote that. The other thing is that it also activates the parasympathetic nervous system in the body. That's the system that actually counteracts the secretion of stress hormones, particularly cortisol and adrenaline. So when you're stressed out, you release these two hormones, cortisol and adrenaline, that raise your heart rate, increase your blood pressure, get you ready to move, activate you. But if those chemicals stay in your body too long, they start having deleterious effects. And so deep rhythmic breathing helps push those back and restore your body to a little bit more sense of calm. Along with exercise, sleep, or maybe better defined as lack of sleep, is probably the most important factor that affects your overall mental and physical fitness. It has so many restorative effects that take place in your body that they're now finding that doesn't happen when you're awake. And yet 60% of the people in this country suffer from chronic lack of sleep or get less than the required amount, which is at least 7 hours a day. If you look at somebody who has, let's say, who's been awake for 20 hours, they've shown now that that's almost the equivalent in terms of decreasing your reaction times and your awareness times to the equivalent of being legally intoxicated. So think about that when somebody's pulling a long shift and they're called to operate heavy machinery on a fire or start falling timber or suddenly get released from a fire and expect to drive home after not having sleep. So you can see the ramifications about that and the potential for a lot more injuries.
The stigma with mental health that I kind of feel and see is that it isn't something you see. I mean, when somebody has a broken leg or they've had shoulder surgery or whatever, we can physically see that. You have to own that. Yeah, I did this or that. When it's something you're feeling on the inside, it's really easy to just play it off like it's not there.
There are a variety of mental health resources available, including nonprofits, municipal, state, and federal employee assistance programs, and health insurance options. For wildland firefighters, remote locations, and specific resources dealing with trauma are challenges. A list of resources is available on the NWCG Mental Health Subcommittee webpage.
So when I first got out, I really didn't have very many tools, and that's what kind of led to the depression that I had. But you know, I've utilized the VA a lot more frequently now, which is a very good tool. Just opening up to counselors, talking there, and even just talking to people on my crew, you know, because they kind of get it, or my spouse, you know. So those tools are really good.
The single biggest thing or contributing factor that I can see that could help us is facilitating a way to get help, to find a mental health professional that has a glimmer, that has an idea as to the psychology of the wildland firefighter.
Critical incident stress management is an overarching system in a sense for dealing with a traumatic event. And so within that, there are peer support, pre-education, the mental health aspect of it. And depending on what the needs are, we can adjust to what the situation really needs. And then there's the natural peer support that we have, that cohesion that we have in doing this job that just happens. And sometimes when we've had a serious accident, a near miss, a fatality, we don't know what to do, but little do we know exactly what to do. It's the stuff that we do to get each other up the hill, to keep working, to encourage and just support, listen. So we do it all the time.
We all know the importance of physical fitness. Everybody expects that from our job. We know we have to be physically fit in order to do our job safely and effectively. But we also have to start looking at mental fitness right now, forming good connections with people, eating well, practicing mindfulness, being able to look at your own risk factors and address them in an honest fashion. And just like physical fitness, you can build upon it, but you can also lose it if you don't practice it. It's the same with mental fitness. You have to keep working on it. Not that something's wrong with you, but that you can take all the good things about you, the good psychological attributes you have, and promote them in a positive way to make you stronger to deal with the ongoing chronic stress that we face in society today as a whole.
So now comes the part in this where we normally have a very large discussion about what we got out of that video. And for me, I know that there are some things that have hit home out of that video for me. You know, I've had friends that have taken their lives in the past. I have also, because of my working for the Department of Defense over in Iraq, I suffer from PTSD. But after seeking help for it, I now know the coping skills that I need. That's the thing about PTSD, is it never truly goes away. You just learn how to cope with it. You learn how to live with it. You know, you find healthy coping mechanisms. So that's one of the big thing, is that mindfulness is the big thing for me. You know, every day. I mean, there are some things that I'd be driving down the road and notice certain things that kind of send me back to that place. And it's like, you know, you just take a few minutes out of your day to do some box breathing, or, you know, deep rhythmic breathing, you know, or listening to music, or finding just a healthy coping mechanism. So I don't know, what do you guys, as far as Justin, Seth, what were some of the takeaways that you all got when you first saw this video?
Well, not so much as far as first time I watched this, but being in discussions on this topic multiple times now, leading this in person, just some comments that have come from it. One thing that sticks out in my brain is most of us have been part of a CISM debriefing after a bad accident or something that happens, and that's great. Getting people within a room within 24, 48 hours after something bad and discussing it, that's great. But it's only one night after something like that. And I know from personal experience, one night may not be enough. So expanding that beyond just a one night tell all could be very important for the retention of the younger members and older members. It doesn't have to be young or old. So I think that is an important thing to think about. I've also had chiefs through these discussions come up and basically say, well, we're instituting this for our members, but who do I talk to? I've got nobody above me to bring my issues to the table with. So it's not just the new firefighters, it's not just the old, it's our chiefs. Where are they going to go? How can they get help? Some progressive ideas that have come out while we've been teaching this class is basically having a wellness month in your training calendar. One department, they do all the physical checks. They do the blood pressures. They do lung capacity tests. They do all the physical stuff that we're used to. But then they also bring in a counselor and just put them in a room, and basically everybody at least has to go in there and say hi. And if you have something more than hi to say, now's your opportunity. So I think that's a progressive look. People have brought up that maybe just reaching out to counseling agencies locally, and maybe they would provide their services for free, a reduced rate. One person mentioned that you can a fire department member could go to the counseling service, and then a bill gets sent back to the fire department, but it's completely anonymous. So nobody knows who it was. And that kind of gets over the other word that we hear all the time while talking about this, is the stigma of going to get that help, that anonymous bill there. So those are just some things that have come up in the discussions we've had so far. And every time we do one of these in person and have a big group, I learn a tremendous amount. I guess one other one that stuck out to me was basically said, like, we're a small department. We don't only just do department stuff together. We also do, in our free time, our hobbies bring us together. And we just like know if somebody's having a bad day or struggling. And when he said that, I was like, okay, I can agree with that. But then once I got home and started thinking about that comment, that's exactly why we're here talking about this. It's the people that you least expected. You may be with a person every single day, but what is going on in the background, and if they don't get that anonymous help or just help from the fire department, they really could be struggling, and you just don't know, even if you are best friends with them. So those are just some of the reactions that I have been taken away as we present this across the state.
Yeah, and I'd agree. I it's one of those reluctant topics, and I personally have never really, I guess, breached it to this extent, let alone try to incorporate it into something that I've taught. But I think the overall outcome of it's been really good, and I think a lot of people, it's sort of that elephant in the room, right? Most people probably could benefit from it, but either don't know how to bring it up or just don't feel comfortable talking about it. And like Seth said, we've all been through that critical stress management stuff, been through debriefings and those sorts of things. And there's all kinds of things that we see in this business that can affect us. And I've seen young new firefighters come into this and experience something somewhat horrific, and it drove them completely out of it. They said, no, this isn't for me, and I just don't want to put myself through that anymore, and I don't want to see that stuff. And that's really unfortunate. We kind of goes back to the conversation earlier about recruiting and retention. Is, I think you have to be realistic in telling the people what they could be exposed to, but yet help them understand that if there's certain things that they don't want to be involved with, they don't necessarily have to be. There's other people that are willing or able to take those on. And for some of us that have been in the business a long time, I think it can be cumulative, multiple years of seeing things and, you know, that sort of stuff. So I think you really have to, I know one thing for me, it's really forced me to kind of think about that stuff, you know, and how it affects me and that sort of stuff. But I think, again, as I've went around and done these classes in person, I too have had a lot of the interaction of, well, can you get me more resources? Or, you know, this is a really good topic, and I'm glad you brought it up, because I know my department's had a rough year, and just lots of different things like that. So I think overall, it's not a topic many of us really want to talk about, but I think it's one that we really need to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's more than, you know, we recognize the fact that first responders are actually, taking their lives at an alarming rate. And we acknowledge the fact, but I don't believe that there's enough to really find out why, or really, it's kind of like the whole cancer, the job related cancer stuff. They tell you that you need to wash your gear, and you need to keep your gear washed, and you don't take your gear home, you don't wash it, don't expose your family to this stuff. And they have they make washing machine extractors for this, but they acknowledged it, and they said, here's some ways that we can kind of remedy it, or to mediate it. But yet, when it comes to stuff like this with mental health, they kind of sit there and say, well, we acknowledge it, but we don't really know how we can do it. And Seth and I taught this in a department, and there was a member there that actually came, and that individual had a family member that had recently taken their lives. And that individual did say that it's not necessarily the job related stuff that we see, but there's also personal stuff behind the scenes that we don't see. And I've heard the argument of, well, we're a small enough department and we see each other every day, or we know our folks every day, but there are individuals that go out, you might be staring that person right in the face and not knowing what's going on, behind those eyes. And then all of a sudden we're shocked that it happened. And I kind of look at that, people who suffer from mental health issues, I kind of see that they kind of go through the 5 stages of grief. And once they reach that last stage of the acceptance stage, that's at that point where they've been suffering in silence, and now they've accepted what's going to happen, and you'll never know. I mean, you could stare them right in the face and you'll never know, because a depressed person is not somebody that's walking around with a cloud over their head all day long. The person who has come to that acceptance stage may be laughing and having a good time, and so that's where, when they reach that acceptance stage, that's where it becomes dangerous. So that's why we need to start looking for those signs, the subtle hints, the signs that you might be seeing something in that individual to where, they used to hang around and want to talk after a meeting or after a training. And now you're seeing that they're either not showing up for trainings, or they come to training, they don't talk, they don't do anything, they're late, and they leave immediately without, it doesn't cost you anything to kind of sit down and say, hey, what's going on? And I think people who do suffer from mental health issues just want somebody to just acknowledge their issues, like, at least somebody's noticing this. So the question is, if you had an individual in your department or in your ranks come up to you, or you might be that person that goes up to somebody, how would you react? And I know for me, if I had somebody that came up to me and said, hey, I got something I want to talk to you about. The reason that they're coming to talk to me, or they're coming to talk to you, is because they trust you. So, if they trust you enough to be vulnerable like that, to want to lay down their guard and talk to you about this stuff, be open-minded. Come in there with an open mind, and just listen. That's the most thing that they want, is somebody to listen. And, I don't think we have enough as far as protocols in that, because like we've kind of been talking, it's kind of the elephant in the room. Everybody kind of acknowledges it, but nobody really wants to say anything about it. And then one of the departments, they do a wellness check once a month, but you know, the physical wellness check, but then also they have the counselor that comes in, and all you have to do is go in and say hi. You know, that's it. All you have to do is go say hi. There's some other departments out there that once a month they meet and they get everybody together, all the membership, including the families, and they go and do a family activity. You know, it might take everybody out to dinner or something. So, you know, it's sad, and I honestly believe that one first responder that takes their life is one too many. So, you know, I would love to see the day that we don't have to you know, deal with stuff like this, but unfortunately we do. So some of the resources that we have in the state of Nebraska that I know of is the CISM, the Critical Incident Stress Management. That to request a briefing, you can call that number on the top. If you have any more questions, you can contact this individual here. She is the program manager, and they would be glad to come out and talk to you, maybe do some training. I know they offer some of this training at fire school every year. So there's that. I also have some national mental health resources that are out there. Get the Mental Health Subcommittee, Mental Health America, Everyone Goes Home, the National Critical Incident Stress Management, and Firefighter Behavioral Health Alliance. You know, like Seth said, you know, the CISM, that's great, but that's usually one night a week, or once. It's one night. And what do you do after that? I mean, it's not, you go in there, you talk about it, everything's fine, and you go home. There's stuff that will continue to affect you. You know, trust me, I've been doing this for over 20 years, and there are things that I can still to this day see that I wish that I had never seen, but you know, it is there. So you're never cured from it. You just learn how to healthy cope with it. You guys have anything else on the mental health?
I was just gonna say, the whole discussion, I mean, volunteer firefighters, they go through every scenario. Since we're talking wildfire specific, I mean, this can look a lot of different ways. And I saw it this summer as fires were popping up throughout the panhandle, and it was pretty well a holy cow, there's another fire and we got to go respond at night, and or be up really early in the morning, and that's pulling you away from your job. So you may be damaged financially from it. I always say wildfire is completely different than structure fire, because it's truly a marathon, not just a, well, let's go put it out and be back in an hour. So that cumulative, constantly having to go out for an entire shift, that can definitely wear down. And I know, even me personally, in June and July, I'm all excited, but as we drag into this longer seasons that we're having into November, I mean, I can tell my attitude shifts by the end of it, and ready to take a break from the old wildfire world. But I guess that's how I see it within the wildfire culture and how we operate.
Yeah, and I'd just add, take care of yourselves and watch out for each other, and don't be afraid to, ask a friend if you're feeling like you need some help or need somebody to talk to, and don't be afraid to help someone if you're the person that they come to and ask. You never know when something like this is gonna pop up or creep in, and so I would just express to everybody, just take good care of yourself. And like Seth said, we're having longer seasons, and they tend to feel like they drag out and cut into our downtime. And we all do this because we want to, but we all need a break, and we all need to step back at some point a little bit and take care of ourselves. So just a reminder to take care of yourself and everybody around you, and your coworkers and your fellow firefighters.
Yeah, and I would suggest, even though we've kind of been facilitating this and discussing this in this recorded event, I would highly encourage all of you to, even at any point, pause and have that open discussion about anything that we've covered, as far as in the mental health and the lessons learned and what you're seeing in your areas as far as, fire weather and stuff. So yeah, I would definitely encourage anybody to pause this at any point and discuss this. But I mean, the main thing to remember in all of this is we're human, we make mistakes, that we can come back from said mistakes. So, make sure that when you do have those people on your department, don't judge them for how often they show up, but what they bring to the table. You all chose to integrate that individual into your ranks. Why did you choose to do that? Did you choose to do it because you needed the help, or did that individual bring something to the table? So just remember, don't look at it as how often they show up, because not everybody can be the super volunteer to where they make every call and every training and all of that. It's people have lives outside of the volunteer fire departments. We don't get paid to be a volunteer firefighter. So there is things that we have to take care of outside of this department. Give praise where praise needs given, and give correction where correction needs given. But if you do need to correct somebody, do not do it in front of the entire membership. Or if you need to call somebody out, do not do it in front of everybody. Has more integrity for you as a leader, or you as a person, to pull that person aside and discuss what is going on just between the two of you. So attitude reflects leadership. And a lot of times we say that, if you're having a hard time with somebody and nobody else is having a hard time with that individual, maybe you need to take a hard look in the mirror as to why that attitude, that you're having that issue with that individual. And nobody gives you, we all have the standard operating procedures, standard operating guidelines. But as a firefighter, as a fire officer on a volunteer fire department, it is tough, especially if you rise through the ranks from firefighter to, lieutenant, captain, assistant chief. And there's a lot of standard operating procedures and guidelines and protocols for everything, but a lot of times it's hard to learn to be a leader, and it's hard to be in that position. There's no manual to follow, and you're going to make mistakes. And you know what? As the title says, being human is okay. We're going to make mistakes. And then little Paul Combs here, positive environment begins and ends with all of us. So if, garbage in and garbage out. If you surround yourself with a bunch of negative people, chances are your attitude's going to be negative. Try to surround yourself with positive people and try to bring a little positivity into the environment in which you work. And just be kind. Just, everybody has bad days, so be empathetic. understand that, not everybody's feeling the same way that you are. Not everybody does the same thing that you do. Everybody starts at day zero, including yourself. I started at day zero 22 years ago. So everybody starts at day zero. Have patience. So usually at the end of this is when all the individuals get out and start doing the shelters. So this is an online refresher. You will need to contact your training coordinator, and see when the next time you'll be able to do a shelter deployment. So in order, if you're doing this to get recertified for your red card, you still need the shelter deployment. So you have Seth, who's out in the western part of the state. That's his contact. I'm in the east and Justin's in the south. And this is the map as to who your contact will be. And when you finish this, there will be a test at the end with some questions on that. And when you complete the test, that information gets forwarded to one of us, and that's who will be taking care of your red card, issuing your red card, and with your PAC test. That's who you send your PAC test information to. Anything I'm forgetting, Justin?
Nope. I'm just going to make a correction there on the bottom. If you can't read it, my email is jnicholas to finish out the 2@unl.edu. So give me a call if you need anything. I'll be more than happy to help you.
And I've got an edit too. My phone number ends in 3540. So 3540.
Boy, I did a bang up job on this, didn't I?
That looks like a Friday slide to me.
And it's only Thursday, so. All right. Yeah, like I said, if any of you have any questions or even just want to talk, especially if you're a fire chief and you have nobody else to talk to, you can contact one of us. Doesn't matter. Like I said, I'll make sure that I correct Justin's information and Seth's information. So, all right. If nothing else, thank you for tuning in.
Thanks, everybody.
See ya.